Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Klingberg Wing Mark II development. I'm Rob Klingberg, your host. If you're watching this video, you're probably one of those folks that is heavily invested in this project. You've been watching all along and you have great patience to listen to me ramble on about all the technical details that went into the project. And I love your feedback saying that you appreciate all of those details. So I've made two separate videos. One for those with a short attention span, and one for you folks that like to hear all the details. So before we get started here, if there's anybody out there watching who doesn't have a really long attention span, doesn't want to hear all these details, click away now. Just go away, because it's just going to be long and dry, and for you, boring. So don't leave snarky comments. Just click away and go watch the short version of this. I think they're all gone. We're safe now. We can talk about the technical details. You might be wondering why I'm not standing in front of my wing and telling you all the great things about it and how wonderful the flight was. And normally I would do that. But I got a secret for you. The wing is broken. Afraid so. I broke all of the down tubes on the pilot's cage on the landing. It was a little rough. But, you know, any landing you can walk away from is a good one. There was no significant damage to the wing itself and no damage to me at all. So that's the good part. I'm not surprised. You know, I've talked before about my concerns of the fragility of the pilot's cage, and I'll be dealing with that here. But overall, it was a good thing. The pilot's cage absorbed most of the impact, and I walked away scot-free. So that's pretty good. So what you see behind me here is a shot from the right winglet. The camera's mounted on top of the right winglet. I'm about 20 feet up, give or take, maybe, yeah, about 20 feet. My wonderful helper Trey down here on the beach, we had positioned him to yell at me, honk a horn, whatever, when he felt that I'd gone too far and I should turn. One of the first things that I learned on this flight is, wow, it's got a really flat glide. I mean, once it's trimmed out and up and going, holy smokers, it takes off and goes. I could have easily been 100 yards plus offshore from this little tiny height that I have here. She really scoots. And that kind of told me that flying directly west out of the Marina Beach flying site, the site's not big enough for this glider. The glider just has too much performance for the size of the site if you can't maneuver efficiently, and at this point we're still sorting that out. So I think future flights at Marina Beach are going to be headed south or southwest, where I can launch such that I'm flying down the beach and we don't have to worry about turning. And let me tell you, having a turn be mandatory on your first test flight, well, that's a little demanding. But from previous tests, I knew that I would have the capacity to do at least a minimal turn and stay on path. And we planned the whole flight out where I was supposed to initiate my turn, and I did that, and it all went reasonably well except for the landing. The landing was rough because the CG is still too far forward, and I'm going to talk about that after we watch the videos. So let's, I'll spin you around here, and we'll get the computer up, and I'll do a voiceover as we watch the flight videos on my computer. Okay, here we are at the beginning of my takeoff run for the first flight of the wing. And I do actually fly here. It's just a short hop. But I think it's interesting to look at because it'll help analyze some of the issues that are still plaguing my design, as one way to put it. You'll see here in the prep for takeoff that I have flaps down about 30 degrees here, and we see some of the flow separating. It gets about halfway down the flap, then it separates, which is to be expected. And the same thing is happening on the elevon here. The elevon's actually down about 35 degrees. I'm commanding both left stick and nose down. And this flow separation on the elevon is causing a lack of control, and it's something I'm going to have to address going forward by limiting throw or other means. I am hooked in here on the horizontals of the pilot's cage, just forward of the vertical support here, the aft vertical support, and the lift harness That's the flight harness that's hooked in there at the forward position, and aft of the post, just after the post, is where the lift harness is hooked in, and that's why you see that my body, my belly button are essentially directly above that point, because that's the balance point that I'm using for handling the wing. And the line to the lift harness that's connected in forward of the post, it's actually slack at this point. And you'll see at the beginning of the takeoff run here that I feed in some even more down elevator, and that's to prevent the wing from, to try to help prevent the wing from going behind me. The center of gravity right now is way up in here, and if you run really hard and fast, you essentially run out from it underneath the wing, and the wing pitches up on you. So it becomes necessary to both push the nose down with both elevator and with your hands in order to keep from running out from underneath it. So let's just take a look at what this flight looks like, very short hop, and then we'll come back and look at various chunks of it. Here we go. That's it. Not much of a flight, but it is a flight. And there's something to be learned from that. Now, first thing I want to point out is, see this little log here? When we pre-planned my flight attempts, this was my designated turn start location, that if I got to this log, I would begin a turn to the left and fly down the beach. And I'm pointing this out for future reference for when we take a look at the second flight. Now let's roll this back, put this back here, and let me put this forward to there. You see the down stick that I'm putting in. Lots of down elevator on both sides to keep the nose down as I begin to accelerate. Now, given my age and my weight, my acceleration isn't what it used to be, and I really don't get it moving fast enough before I attempt a takeoff. I am putting in a lot of up elevator. We see that the tufts reattach to the elevons when they come back up, which is to be expected. They can go about 15 degrees nose down without separation. And I am beginning to pull in back stick here. Here I come in full aft stick, so full up elevator, almost full up elevator. And you'll see that now the harness is beginning to lift me up a little bit. The cage is going to come up on me, and it's going to start to lift on the flight harness. And right there, the cage has come up, and it's beginning to lift me, and I can feel that. And what I felt at this point was the nose pitching down. Again, it reminded me a lot of the bad flight or the flight attempt that I had at Dockweiler, where as soon as the glider started lifting my weight, the nose dug down into the sand, and the glider's trying to do that here also. It is starting to pitch nose down, and I'm pulling more up elevator, and it's just beginning to lift some of my weight off the ground. And you see that my backside here is pretty close to the cross member at the back of the pilot's cage. And we'll run this forward just a little bit more here so I can get this. And here, most of my weight's off, so I'm running the control stick. There, I'm off the ground. I have the control stick essentially back to neutral. I'm holding a little bit of up elevator. You see that I'm now hanging low in the pilot's cage. That's because of how the harness was set up. And I'm going into a seated position. So I am now hanging directly below the hook-in point for the flight harness, and that is forward of the lift point. It's directly below where this vertical member intersects the horizontal down here. And let's walk it a little, and we see that we have a partially stalled wing. There's a stall occurring here, and there's some stall occurring here, so that it just shows that I yanked it off the ground too soon, and I am at minimum speed for the wing. The wing is still flying here in the root section, inboard by the flaps, so it is generating some lift. And we'll see that this doesn't last very long. It's just I pop up into the air, and then I'm right back down again. And then I lean back, and I'm pulling an up elevator, and I'm putting my feet forward. You see me lean way back, and I'm just trying to stop the glider from moving forward, bring it to a halt. So I'm trying to fully stall the wing and dig in my feet and bring it to a stop, which works pretty good. and I'm able to set it down gently without any problem. And I want to run this back a little bit here so you can see what happens when I actually, right there is when the wing is starting to fly, actually. We see the flows attachments for it. It comes shooting forward, and the cross member on the pilot's cage hits me in the butt. And I guess you could call that a motivation of sorts. Actually, what's happening here is as that pilot's cage moves forward, the center of gravity is moving aft. I'm now sitting further aft than where I was hooked in. The CG has actually shifted aft to the point where the wing takes off. So that's a real good indicator that the glider is still set up nose heavy, and I'm going to discuss later how that happened. But when my weight is all the way back and my butt's up against the cross member here, the CG is about appropriate and the glider actually takes off. And then as soon as I start flying, if I can get this to go a little bit further forward here, as soon as I take off, my weight shifts back forward, and then I'm back on the ground again because it's nose heavy. So, of course, this all happened in a matter of just a few seconds. What do we got here? We got like 3 seconds worth of frames there where it goes so fast that my brain cannot process everything that's happened. I realized physically I had a sensation of it being nose heavy, but heck, I got it off the ground. So I thought, oh, well, I guess it's okay. And we took this as a pretty good first hop and decided to go back and try a second one. But before we go and take a look at that second hop, I wanted to run another little video for you here. And let me see if I can call that up here. And we'll edit out this big pause. Okay, I've racked up here some video shot of the cockpit area. Camera is mounted on the aft upright and it's looking forward. You can see the control stick in the foreframe, and up ahead you can see a standard Hall wind meter, and just to the right of that is a funny looking pointer thing with a tail on it. That's actually an angle of attack measuring device. It is set up such that if I want to check how I'm holding the nose relative to the wind, what angle of attack I'm holding, I can glance to my right and see that. That was fairly handy on takeoff. Obviously not something I can reference in flight. It all goes too fast. And in addition, Peter's standing off to my right and he's calling out the angle of attack. And generally speaking, the angle of attack was running between 5 and 7 degrees as I was setting up to do my takeoff run here. Now, I do want you to watch as closely as possible the airspeed indicator as I do my takeoff run. Let's run that forward here. Here we go. You'll see that the wind is blowing. That second mark coming up there, it's like 15. So there we're up to 15, a little bit more. I yank it off the ground, and then I'm back down on the ground again. And let's zoom in and take a closer look at that airspeed indicator as I go through that takeoff run. Okay, I've really zoomed in on the airspeed here. I know this might be quite out of focus, not much I can do about it at this point, but it'll allow us to see what we need to see. The airspeed indicator disc is right here, just above the clamp where we're holding the airspeed on with, and that's sitting at about 10 miles an hour. This is 15 right here, if you can barely see that mark, and then we got 20 miles an hour right up here, and you really can't see it, but I have a red band of tape around the vertical post here, that indicating the approximate stall speed of 20 miles an hour. So I'm looking for that disc to be somewhere up in that range before I can take off. Now, the predicted stall speed with the flaps deployed 30 degrees is about 18 miles an hour. So let's take a look. This goes really fast, and we'll come back and revisit it after we run it forward. You'll see that the wind is blowing between 10 and 15 miles an hour, running about 12 there, 13, 14, and then I start my run in here, and we see it come up. somewhere in here shortly, and then we're down. So let's go back and take a look at that frame by frame, or at least somewhere close to that. Now we'll see that it comes up here, and there, we're just about 20 right there. And that's when I yanked it off the ground. We're right at stall speed, and that's why the wing was showing, the tufts were showing stalled on the wing, and we make the short little hop through the air. There we went just a little above 20, 22 there, just for a short pulse, and then back down again, and then I land shortly after that. And the airspeed drops back down to whatever the wind speed is. So this shows that the stall speed is right around 20, 22 miles an hour as indicated by the airspeed indicator. Now, having measured this against an anemometer, I know that this is not entirely accurate, and it reads anywhere from 2 to 4 miles an hour too high. So it looks like stall speed is pretty close to the theoretical prediction of 18 miles an hour with the flaps deployed, and I think that's quite reasonable for this size of aircraft and what we're doing here. If you're going out to fly this type of glider, you're either going to take it off of a steep slope, or you're going to fly where it's windy, at least blowing like 10, and or you might even be towing it. So a much more healthy human specimen flying this thing, even with a little 10-mile-an-hour breeze, can probably get it off the ground. A little slope, get her running up around 20 miles an hour airspeed, a little bit of headwind, and you'll be able to jerk it off the ground and then put the nose back down and fly away from the hill. So I think it's eminently foot launchable, which was one of the big things to prove here, because a standard class size sailplane's never been foot launched before, and actually managed to achieve that goal here. So quite happy with that. Okay, here I've racked up some footage of the second flight, same day. This is just 15-20 minutes later. This footage was kindly provided by Dennis Bowman. He's a local pilot there and was a huge help on this day. Thank you very much, Dennis. And without having him there with his phone or camera, whatever he had, we would not have had this wonderful view from the left side. And it really shows the flight overall from the big picture quite well. And then we have other cameras that'll give us the close-up view so we can analyze what was going on the flight. I'm just going to run this forward and let you watch it. And of course I have to warn you ahead of time, there is a hard landing at the end and the glider breaks. Actually the wing itself is fine, but the pilot's cage does collapse, and I'm fine. That's not a problem. The rear wheels clipped the ground going sideways, and it just basically sheared the pilot's cage off. And I'll have a few comments later about how the structure failed and what was good about it and what was bad about it. But let's just go ahead and watch the flight. It's quite interesting and a little dramatic. When we turn the corner, and I just cannot flare it to land, and I'm down. Not too bad. Any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. So we'll take that for what it is, and thanks for that footage, Dennis. So now I'm going to rack up some video from the right winglet so we get a closer look at what actually happened on that flight. Okay, here we are, racked up for the second flight, and once again we're got the view from the top of the right winglet, and we'll see that the conditions are practically identical to the first flight. There are some minor differences here. Number one, we're seeing some what appears to be spanwise flow here along the wing. Of course, you got the separated flow on the elevon that we had on the first flight. I'm still not holding the nose low enough, and I'm putting in too much elevator command there, but it is what it is. But we are seeing some flow out here at the tip that's going out spanwise, and what that is
is the glider is actually slightly yawed. We see that the winglet here, the auto yaw winglet, is open, and the winglet itself is pointed into the wind directly. So I have the wing slightly yawed, and that's why we're getting some cross flow here. And it was getting a little bit windier in the day, and the wing was starting to yaw around a bit on takeoff. But I must note that the yaw stability of this thing is so strong, you can't hold a yawed condition on takeoff for very long. The wing just insists on being pointed straight into the wind to take off. Now, if you were in a situation where you had to do crosswind takeoffs, not exactly sure how you would do that with this configuration. I think we're going to be looking at uh, moving forward with perhaps some active yaw control, so that if you are in a circumstance where you have to take off cross slope or cross wind, something like that, you can actually do it. Right now, I think the wing would just force you to be pointed directly into the wind wherever that was coming from. So let's just go ahead and run this and take a look at the whole flight, and then we'll back it up and we'll do some detailed analysis. And right before I start here, let me say that mentally, I have a different plan in my head for this takeoff. We had discussed what happened on the first flight and making adjustments for the second flight. So the idea is I'm going to hold the nose down longer and run harder and build up more speed before I pull it off the ground, so I'm not pulling off in a raw stall condition. And so I yank it off the ground, get the nose back down, and get her up and flying. And when I get to that log, I'm supposed to turn left. Here we go. Off we go. And I'm up, down, here comes the log, start turning, I'm back up, and zowie! I go over tray, and I head down beach, and crunch, and we're down. And there goes the 360 camera off of the keel mount. It's all very exciting. Pause that. So let's go back and take a look at this in a little bit more detail and see what happened. Because this is an excellent view and it reveals a lot of information about what's going on here. So let's see, where are we here? So I start my takeoff run, forward stick once again, hold that nose down, lean into it, and run like the Dickens. Run as fast as my 64-year-old legs will take me. And here you'll see I'm beginning to pull the stick back, and I'm standing a little bit more upright. It's beginning to lift my weight. You see that the pilot's cages come up, and I feel the nose pitching down again, just like it did before, still nose heavy, and I'm actually leaning back here to try to counter that action. And the interesting thing is this is not something I thought to do. This was just kind of a natural hang glider pilot reaction. The nose is going down, so I'm leaning back, and I'm actually kind of prepping my body to bring it to a halt again, stop the takeoff run. But as we go a little bit further forward here, we see that, well, gosh, that leaning back shifted the CG again, and I'm up. There I go. Now I'm in a seated position. I got the stick neutralized, but I still got some spanwise flow out here at the tip. In fact, it's pretty bad along the elevon. This elevon's not doing much of anything, and this portion of the wing is essentially stalled because I got spanwise flow, and that's just the end result of yanking it off the ground again. So this wing's actually stalled. Unfortunately, it's not dropping that wing rapidly, and we'll talk about that later. And then I try to pick up that wing a little bit, and we see that the flow is reattaching here. And I'm commanding to put the left wing down, try to bring the right wing up. And my legs are a little confused here because I thought, oh, gee, I thought maybe I was going to bring that to a halt and just stick it on the ground. But I'm up flying, so I better concentrate on flying the aircraft. And we go a little bit further forward here. And boom, I'm back on the ground again. Now you see I'm pulling in a lot of up elevator here and commanding a left-hand turn, yet I'm back on the ground. And that's a condition of, we see I'm up flying here, I go seated, so I am, what, 4 inches in front of this cross member here, so I've shifted the CG 4 inches forward just by taking off and hanging from the harness. And that shift of the CG forward puts me back on the ground again. So we take off, and then boom, we're back down again. And my feet touch, I'm pulling in some up elevator, I'm leaning back a little bit, and I'm thinking maybe I might skid it to a halt here, but I'm not too sure. So, but gee, just a couple more steps, that leaning back shifted the CG back again, and I kind of skidded and took off again. And so now I'm up flying, and my legs are flailing about, and you see me leaning here, leaning back. I'm pulling in some up elevator, and I see that log in front of me, and I'm starting to command that left-hand turn. I better get going down the beach. Okay, so now at this point, I am at my log where I'm supposed to turn, and we see that I'm into a fairly good bank already. So I saw the log coming, and I've started my turn, but I realized that my feet are just inches off the ground. And at this point, I'm thinking, if I just yank in as much elevator as I can and get my feet in front of me, I can just go full stall and stop the flight right here. And this is an area where the sand dune drops off considerably. You can see it with the tracks here. The slope of the dune here is going to essentially double. Well, we see what happens. I'm trying to go full stall and stick it, and then the hill drops away from me. And as I go over the log right here, and look, I'm leaning way back because I was going to pull in full up elevator, get my feet down, get my feet in front of me, and bring this whole thing to a halt. But my feet aren't touching the ground. The ground dropped away from me. I now have the CG back where the glider wants it. The wing is still partially stalled. I'm pulling a lot of elevator, and darned if that 15-mile-an-hour breeze coming up this little steeper slope didn't generate some lift. And that's when the thing really goes. She really takes off, and I start to climb. And the next thing I know, well, there, I'm 8 feet up, maybe 10 feet. I better turn this thing, keep turning it. And here comes Trey, my helper at the beach. He's another local pilot. He was a huge, huge help. Trey's supposed to yell at me and tell me when to turn or honk the horn. And he's getting in position to do that. He realizes that I'm up and flying. And we see that. Let's see if I can get this a little further forward. There. And I think this is the funniest view of the whole flight. I'm up about 20 feet here, and Trey's down here. He's yelling at the top of his lungs, turn, turn, turn. And just to emphasize the whole thing, he's pointing with his arm where I should go. And let me tell you, it was really clear to me where I should go because there's all this water out here. And I can hear Trey yelling. But what's happening is the visuals of the water are coming straight this way, going in my eyeballs and up into my brain, and my brain is screaming at the top of its voice, ocean, ocean, ocean. So I hear two things at once. I hear Trey going, turn, 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 and then in the background I hear ocean, ocean, ocean. So I had a lot of motivation to get this thing turned and go down the beach, because from this altitude here, I could have easily flown 100 yards offshore. And the surf's really rough out there, would have destroyed the wing, and I'm not sure that my little inflatable life vest here would have been of much help, or the knife to cut myself free of all of the mangled wreckage if I hit that water. So there's a lot of motivation to turn here. And Trey's being extra helpful by pointing the correct direction to turn. Thank you, Trey. And here we go. I know that I'm going to have to fly this thing and turn it and get her headed down the beach. And I go right over the top of Trey here. I'm up well over his head. He's looking up going, I wonder where he's going to go. I wonder where he's going to land. But I got it banked over here pretty good. And just at this point, flow's reattaching. I got good control. And I'm beginning to topside the aileron here a little bit. I want to make sure that I don't overbank and stick a wingtip in the ground. There's other footage that shows that when I initiated this turn, it had to be fairly accurate. The wingtip was probably only 2-3 feet off the ground when I started the turn. I have plenty of clearance here, but I don't want to overbank it and cartwheel the darn thing, and that'd be really bad. Um, so I'm just bringing my 50 years of flying experience to bear here to try to keep this thing in a situation where it's not disastrous. So I've flown past Trey, and I'm missing all the big logs over here, and I know that I actually kind of like this area because it's flat and fairly free of debris. I don't like it because it's wet sand, and it's not nearly as cushiony as the dry stuff up over here. And at this point, I'm thinking, well, I might be able to slide it, let it just slide a little with the crosswind and get a little further away from the water over here where the sand's a little softer. But I only had that thought for a moment. Um, and then I realized I'm going to have to land this thing. I'm going to have to set her down, and I am screaming at this point, not verbally, speed-wise. Everybody that saw the flight said, man, when you cleared that drop off and started flying, you were hauling butt. I mean, this thing went up to 30, 35 miles an hour really fast. Um, and my brain's mostly thinking about how I'm going to deal with all that speed when I get to the ground, because I realize that I don't really have good flare authority here. I'm pulling in quite a bit of up elevator, but see here I'm sitting that 4 or 5 inches further forward. I'm hanging from the harness, and with the CG that far forward, the wing has a lot of static margin, and the elevators are just less effective. They're kind of mushy, and they're not pitching the nose up. And if all of this would have actually dawned on me while I was flying, I would have really pushed myself back with my left hand and pushed away from the stick and gotten the CG back and gotten the thing slowed up that way. But too fast, too much stuff coming into the brain, couldn't do it all at once in the flight. So it's just get ready to have a rough arrival. And that's what I'm doing here. And there it is. I got my feet out in front of me. And at this point, here's where I should have been doing this a few frames earlier. I should have been leaning way back like this to get things slowed up. But I'm doing it here, starting to stall the wing again. But I got my feet out in front of me, ready to hit that sand. And if we get this one more frame forward, and boom, there. Got a foot out, going to dig in that heel, try to bring this thing to a halt. My left leg here, you know, it seems to be a historical thing in aviation. I was flying with a bad left knee. I twisted this knee several months ago, and it's in the period of recovery, but not particularly strong at this point. So I really couldn't keep both feet in front of me. That knee wasn't going to take a lot of load, so it's really just going all into the right leg. And I'm kind of letting the left leg do whatever it wants to do so I don't do any more damage to that knee. And here I am. I'm way back in the pilot's cage where I'd like to be, get it slowed up. And then I think in the next frame here, you'll see that the wheels hit when we begin to shear the pilot's cage off of its mounts. But I got my feet pretty much in front of me and absorbing the impact. Wings still flying a little bit. The tufts are still going. But one more frame, there I go. The wheels are impacting the ground back here, putting a side load on the pilot's cage and just shearing it off. And I'm tuck and roll, and absorb that impact. And I like to point out here the serendipitous part of the whole thing. I'm actually hooked into the pilot's cage right here on the lower part of it, the horizontal. And nominally, the glider's designed to have me hooked into these rails that are up here by the tail boom. And we couldn't do that because the straps that we brought were too short. So I just hooked in down here, and that both caused problems and another little solution, because at this point the pilot's cage is ripped free. I'm attached to the pilot's cage, so I'm essentially detached from the glider at this point. And my body's digging in, and I'm coming to a rapid halt here. However, the wing is still moving forward. The wing has not fully impacted the ground here. It has not stopped moving. And if I had been hooked in here at the rails overhead, oh, that wing would still be dragging me along with it. It's almost 100 pounds, and it's got a lot of inertia, and it would have just kept going. And the wing would have dragged me through the wreckage of the pilot's cage, and that could have been bad. Might not have been bad, but it could have. So the fact that my motion stopped with the pilot's cage, that's probably a good thing. We'll have to think about that going forward in the future as to where the best place to hook in is. And then one more frame here, if I can get this back forward a little bit. And that's it. And here we see the wing is just now finally, it's hit out at the wingtip. The center part's coming down. But I've stopped moving. I've let go, my hand's up. I'm letting go of everything. The pilot's cage is finishing shearing off, and I'm just kind of sitting out on the ground. I'm okay, but the wing is still going. And that's why it was a good thing to be disconnected from the wing. And we see here the sudden stoppage of the wing is forcing the flaps to go down to 90-degree deployment. Now, earlier, if I would have had the presence of mind or enough time, I probably could have yanked on full 90-degree flaps and just stopped the thing from flying and gotten it back on the ground before I went off that little lip of the sand dune. But hindsight, just not enough time to do it. Not familiar enough with operating the aircraft. Mental overload. So then it comes to a somewhat graceful halt. And I grab onto what's left of the pilot's cage, and my brand new 360-degree view camera goes for a nice little trip down the beach here as it snaps off. But it's fine. It's okay. That money's not wasted. We get to use that again. And then I just sit here, wait for help to come, and then Trey comes over and makes sure that I'm okay, and we get ready to carry her back up the hill. Here comes Trey. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. And at this point, I'm thinking, gosh, I've probably really busted up the wing. And I was very surprised to see that the only damage really was to the pilot's cage. The only thing significant was the uprights. The winglets, there was a minor amount of damage to the winglet mounts out here. And one bracket on the pilot's cage that attaches to a down tube was snapped, but it's not that big of a deal. Eminently rebuildable. So I'm fine. I'm unscathed, and the glider really very minimal amount of damage to it. So all in all, considering the situation, not bad. So I'll rack up some other footage here, and we're going to do a little bit more analysis. Okay, so this analysis is a little different than the other stuff, a little more human in nature. I just wanted to run some video here and show you what really makes these projects possible. Yes, I've worked for many years and put a lot of hours in, but you can't do it alone. You always need help of some kind, and these local pilots are very generous to help. Here's Peter out carrying one wingtip. Peter Hudson's out here, my main helper. Here's Dennis Bowman. Here's George. Sorry, don't remember your last name, George. And here's Trey, the guy who told me to turn, go down beach. And they're all helping carry it back up the hill, and they all played a role in getting me off the ground. And I want to give many thanks to all the people that have helped me get this far. And these projects are never just one person. We like to identify one person as being the creator and doing all these great things. But without that help, it just wouldn't be possible. So thanks much, guys, and I look forward to working with you in the future. So now let's go look at some really nitty-gritty detail analysis of what's going on with the wing, especially relative to the flow conditions, and because it tells us a lot about the design and how it's working. Okay, I figure if you have stuck with me this long, you're in for the whole deal, and you're willing to get into some of the more nitty-gritty details on the flow conditions. So I've racked up some footage here from the camera that was on the tail boom, and it's shooting both left and right wing at the same time, but we're going to look mostly at the left wing. We've seen a lot of footage of the right wing, and we'll take a look at the flow conditions here. Now what you see here initially is that, and this is all in slow motion, super slow motion, and I'm going to just run it forward here a bit, let it run. It's just really slow. But we see here the initial conditions. I'll actually back that up a bit. This is right before I start my run, and the flow conditions are pretty good on this Elevon. The problem that you see here are long pieces of yarn that are stuck on some gooey tape spots. They're just not well behaved. But most of the flow, most of these are indicating some nice flow over the Elevon. I got good control. It looks just like it's supposed to look. And then we can move this forward some. And we see, as soon as I apply some down elevators, I begin my takeoff run, using that down elevator to make sure that the wing stays ahead of me. We see this span-wise flow start up immediately on the Elevon. Now we do see that these tufts here are making the hinge line curve okay, and that's a good thing, so that we know that the Mylar seal that I put on the lower surface is working. We're not getting any flow through the gap. If we did get flow through the gap, these guys would be sticking up and coming loose or sticking out straight. There'd be all kinds of problems with them, but they're well behaved. So this is just a situation of the elevons down quite a bit. This is probably the lower throw limit of the elevon. It looks like it's about 20 degrees, maybe a little bit more, and that's what I'm going to have to limit the down throw to on the elevons. I'm going to have to set this up to probably be at a 2-to-1 differential and have about max 15, 18 degrees of down elevon and about 30 degrees of up to get this thing to behave a little better. So, and then as I get moving there, you see this flow separates off the elevon even more, about half chord of the elevon. Away we go. And we got one tuft right here on the rigid portion between the flap and the elevon. It's fine. Flow's attached. Everything's doing good. So this is just the elevon being stalled. And I'm moving along here. And there. This is right after takeoff. Elevon comes back up, all the flow's reattached, everything's flowing normally here, operating normally. The winglet is aligned with the mount, so we know that the wing is not in a yawed condition. And off I go. And some spectators getting out of the way there, making sure I don't run them over. Good for them. And I'm just bouncing through the various stages of touching down and taking off again. Here we see traditional vortex starting to form up around the end of the elevon here. That's perfectly normal for the type of control surface that it is. Starting my left-hand turn here, somewhere in here I think. We'll get a little bit closer. Got some up elevator and commanding a left turn. I think I'm about up to the log here. We see I'm getting the wingtip pretty close to the ground. I got it a few feet off the ground, and I'm just doing that by feel. I'm not looking out there. I don't know where the wingtip is, but I know how much bank the wing will withstand before I stuff a wingtip. Plus, I know from my original wing that if you were to scrape a wingtip on the sand at this point, they slide along pretty good. It's not too much of a problem. You know, you feel it touch the sand, it slides, and then you hit some opposite aileron and pick it back up out of the sand before you stuff it. Get pretty close here. I ran it pretty close there. That's about as much as I could bank and not put the wingtip into the dune. So I'm doing okay on the flying part. Managing that reasonably well. I'm doing as much turn as I can without stuffing the wingtip. And the flow looks good over the left wing. And here, right there, now we see a stall form here. And it becomes a question in my mind whether this is a stall or a laminar separation bubble, because where it's positioned, this area right here is very typical for laminar separation bubbles. And we know that I'm flying really slow. At near stall speed, the Reynolds number out here is only about 400,000. That's right in the dead man zone where you have a lot of problems with laminar separation bubbles. And they tend to form, the bubble starts to form after the maximum thickness point. And the maximum thickness point is right here where you see the covering material change and the little trim line there. And so that's just very traditional spot form to form, and then they reattach back here somewhere. And that's kind of what we're seeing. We're seeing a round bubble sitting there. So this could be the wing stalled, or it could be a laminar separation bubble. Either way means this part of the wing's not generating any lift, not functioning well here. Generating lift out here, generating lift inboard, but here, no. So my plan is to take one of the wing panels out here in the near future and put trip strip on here and move it around in various places and see if I can and run different angles of attack and see if I can get a laminar bubble to show up, and then put on a trip strip and see if that solves the problem. And this might be a case of that this beautiful composite D-tube that I made and the tight rib spacing and the good covering is just a little too clean for this airfoil. This old NACA section, it likes to have a turbulent boundary layer. It works best that way. And we're down at a Reynolds number that this airfoil really wasn't ever designed to operate at. It's really designed to be 1 million or higher on Reynolds number, and we're down around 400,000. So I obviously cannot change airfoils at this point. It'd be a complete rebuild of the wing section, but I can put trip strips on here and trip the flow and maybe stop. If this is a laminar separation bubble, I can put a stop to it by turbulating the boundary layer. And that'd be a reasonable fix. That just adds a little extra drag at higher speeds. But if it solves this problem, that'd be a big help because we want to maintain control of the wing. Now, I will note at this point that even though this part of the wing is not generating lift, I still have control, and I'm able to maintain keeping that wingtip out of the sand. So move this along a little further here. And there we see that the bubble progresses. This is typical laminar separation bubbles. Starts to form, and then it moves outboard. Very typical for a swept wing. And then I have the elevon back down again. I'm picking up speed, getting the angle of attack back down. Bubble goes away, and the tufts are reattached. Elevon comes back up, and now we have very nice flow conditions out here. Now, on the model, which operates at very low Reynolds numbers, we saw these laminar separation bubbles all the time, and they'd go whipping down the wing, and you would just keep flying. If the tufts hadn't been there, you wouldn't know about it. There's no indication that there's something wrong. And so it'd be a nice thing to fix if I can, not absolutely critical to safe operation of the aircraft at this point. The best fixes would be to put on airfoils that have similar pitching moment coefficients, but that is designed to handle lower Reynolds number. And here comes the edge of the wet sand, and I'm finishing the turn, and we got another little separation event occurring here, and this is kind of where I'm starting to lose pitch authority. And here we see a good chunk of the wing stalled here. This looks much more like a normal stall, started at the trailing edge, which is where stalls really start. There, right there, see, starts and just runs forward really quick. So this looks like a much more normal stall. The fact that this part of the wing stalls and the wingtip doesn't drop is a good sign. I'm going to talk about that after we look at the left wing. And then we come in here for the crash landing. Boom, and I'm down. Okay, so now let's go take a look at the other wing. So here we are looking from the same camera the other direction at the right wing, and we see the condition on the down elevon here, separated flow. We do see the flow on the winglet. It's in good shape. Interesting to see these tufts pointing up here. We see a little bit of flow coming up. And I'm going to pause here for a second, and because I think that's an interesting thing to talk about. The elevon's down, trying to generate a lot of lift here, and there's flow coming out from underneath the elevon here and running up against the winglet. And we see that because the tufts will point up occasionally. Let's see if I can find a good spot here. Like that. They're pointed up. So that's flow coming from the lower surface and running up along the winglet. And that's actually another good sign. This is a sure indicator about why wing potential fences generally or sometimes don't work. The flow conditions that exist that you need to stop from going spanwise are very tall. This is the whole winglet's 3 feet, so we're 1.5 feet up here. If you were to put a wing fence on here, like most people call them a wing fence, that fence needs to be 3 feet tall to stop this flow from sneaking out along the wingtip panel, further out along the span. So this really shows that if you've got spanwise flow conditions that you want to stop, you have to put a really tall fence out there, like a winglet. And this is one of the main reasons that I have the winglets inboard, is to control these flow conditions and make sure that I don't build up spanwise flow out on the wingtips. And we're seeing here that the elevon forces a lot of spanwise flow to occur when it's down too far. Well, that's why I don't have any control surfaces out on the wingtip. This panel out here, outboard of the winglet, there's no control surfaces on that. That's just a rigid section of wing that is flying very nicely, and the winglet's doing its job, stopping the flow from getting out here and ruining the flow on this portion of the wing. So this aspect of the design concept of moving the winglets inboard is working like gangbusters. It's a good thing. And I'm going to show you a shot later shows that the flow is out on the wingtip is very well controlled. We'll run this a little further forward here, probably up to where I take off. And so we see here elevon's up, flow's attached, everything's going fine. We still have some tufts pointing up here as the flow comes up from underneath the from the high pressure up into the low pressure region. But as we get the speed built up here, we see the flow is starting to straighten out. The elevon's commanded up for takeoff here, and the flow conditions look good. And the tufts on the winglet are nicely aligned, but we see that the winglet is open slightly. The auto yaw function has started to do its thing and trying to correct the adverse yaw that's occurring. The other opposite winglet, the left winglet, is locked closed and providing drag and lift, the associated lift to pull that wingtip back. But this wing is actually yawed slightly aft, and the winglet is pointing itself into the relative wind and reducing its lift and drag so that this wing can swing back forward. And that's the basic concept of the auto yaw. Although there are some discussions between Peter and I as to whether this is actually working well or properly, or is actually doing what I want it to do. And he has some very good questions about that. And I wanted to make another flight with these locked closed and get some shots of the flow condition with them locked close and see what it's like then, see what the glider handles like, and see which one I like better. But of course, with the broken pilot's cage, we didn't get a chance to do that flight. Maybe we'll get to do that next time we're out. And we go a little bit further forward here, and then we see here we have very disturbed flow on the wing. The flow's pretty much all separated on the elevon, but it's not down that far. This elevon's only down about 5-7 degrees, something like that. But the flow is completely separated off the elevon, and we see span-wise flow and separation here. And I'm thinking, this might be another laminar separation bubble. That, or I've stalled the wing on takeoff. I yanked it off the ground and stalled the wing. Either one. The flow is messed up here, and once again, when I go out and test the trip strips, I'm going to be looking to see if I can fix this situation. I should actually call them turbulator strips, because that's what they really are. The other important thing to note here, and I'm going to run this a little bit further forward, we get up in flight here, we see the auto yaw winglet still open, and all kinds of nasty things are happening to the flow out on the wingtip. Oh, look at this. It really looks like the beginnings of a stall because the elevon's actually up, and we see flow separating back here. So I'm flying on the verge of a stall at this point. It's starting at the trailing edge, and it's trying to work forward. Then they straighten out again, and we're doing okay. Oh, there it starts up again at the trailing edge, trying to get back forward. We got another separation occurring here. The wing's starting to stall in this region. Still flying out here. That's good. So this could be an indication that there's not quite enough washout in this wing panel. Could be an indication that I was just flying really, really slow. But the camera that we had recording the airspeed during all of this, when we got it back home and went to pull the memory out of it so that I could get the airspeed that was occurring during all of this, there was no memory in the camera. Bummer. Testing failure. Don't know if we forgot to put memory in. Don't know if it popped out somewhere in the crash. We just don't know. So unfortunately, there's no airspeed data for this flight. So I can't really say for sure what speed I'm flying at here. I could easily be flying at stall speed, or we might have other issues occurring. This is classic stall right there. Starts at the trailing edge, goes forward. And here's where I want to talk about the design overall and what I was intending to do with it. If you followed with the program, you know that my main goal, other than performance goals, was to make sure that this aircraft is safe to fly. And safe to fly to me meant no stall spin occurrences, because that's what destroyed my first wing, and I know how deadly they can be and how fast they happen and how uncontrollable they are. And we know throughout aviation history, stall spin has taken many a reasonable pilot and put them in the ground permanently. We don't want to have that happen if we can avoid it. So one of the objectives was to prevent stall spin occurrences with this design. And if you followed with, you know I've done a variety of things to prevent that from occurring. You know, having the elevons inboard, not out at the wingtip, the really tall winglets acting as a giant potential fence, and some other minor factors. And what we see here is that all of that's actually working. And it's working quite well, because there's a significant portion of the wing that is stalled here, more than a third of it, actually, about a third. Nominally, if you got a third of your wing stalled, it's going to drop that wing. And on my original Klingberg wing, you didn't need anywhere near this much stall. You get a portion of this, and it would drop that wing like nobody's business and go into a flat spin. Scary. And I heard circumstances were similar for like the old Mitchell wing, the early versions of it. It's a common problem with swept flying wings. And I was working hard with this design to prevent that. The fact that I was able to go through this flight and do several takeoffs and honk it around through a turn at stall speed. I'm going through a fairly steeply banked turn, something like you would do in a thermal. I am banked over like you would be in a thermal, and I'm flying really slow right at stall speed, and it doesn't drop the wingtip. Horrible flow on the wing is stalling, but I still have control of the aircraft, and it's not breaking into a spin. So at this point, even though this flight went, you know, not exactly according to plan, and we busted some stuff up, we have data here that says that one of the key aspects of the design to make it safe is actually working, and that you can fly this thing on the edge of a stall, honking around through a turn, and it won't drop the wingtip. And it's a really good thing to see. Now, of course, I am in ground effect, and how this behaves out of ground effect will be different. So we'll be doing further tests in the future to ensure that this function is still doing what it's supposed to do and preventing spins. But the fact that you can fly this slow in a turn and not drop a wing is a huge deal to me, and a big success in my mind. So let me just fast forward this, and we're going to take one last view at this before we go off to the garage. And see, we're back to normal flow here, and then I go down elevon, and it starts to flow spanwise, come back up, and there's another little stall. So we got all these stalls occurring, on and off, on and off, on and off, but the wing is still flyable until I bonk it into the ground because I couldn't flare. So let's switch over to the other view. So here we see that Peter has worked his magic with his 360-degree view camera, and we're looking, we're sitting on top of the right winglet, looking straight down at the wing. And we can initially see the strong effect of parking the winglet where it is, inboard like this, and aft towards the trailing edge. The elevon on the right-hand side is down, as we know, and it's got a lot of spanwise flow going on it. Tufts are coming over the gap okay because I have gap seals inside here, so we're not having any leakage there. It's just separated flow because the elevon is so far down. But you see that stops here at the winglet, and the flow out here at the wingtip, because there's no control surface here, it's not deflected down, it's just a regular chunk of wing flying along, and all the flow is nicely organized, and this wingtip is flying, and it's all well behaved. And then as I run us forward here, you'll see that what we saw in the other video where the winglet started to open because it was yawed slightly, that'll show up here. So here I'm starting my run, and we get a slightly yawed condition here, where we see from this tuft and this one here that this whole wingtip is yawed aft. In other words, the nose is yawed to the right, and this elevon is starting to come back up for takeoff, and the tufts are beginning to reattach, but they're also pointing out towards the tip. The winglet has pivoted, and it's pointing itself directly into the relative wind, and we see out here on the wingtip that these tufts are kind of lined up in the same direction as the winglet, saying, oh, the relative wind's coming from over here. So we have a yaw condition here, of a good 10 degrees or something like that. And that is either I'm running crooked, or most likely I had started out with this elevon down significantly, and that elevon being down like that as the wing begins to generate lift will cause a lot of adverse yaw. There's a lot of drag associated with the lift being generated by this section of the wing with the elevon down, so you get adverse yaw, and the wing yaws to the right, and the tufts are showing that. But despite the fact that this flow is still confused here on the elevon and not as nice as we'd like it to be, the wingtip's still flying good. Not as efficiently, the conditions are yawed, but the wingtip is flying. We go further forward in the run here, and somewhere around here I'm off the, now we can tell I'm off the ground here. Let's see, there's about the biggest yawed condition there. And then I think I'm actually into the turn here. Here I'm off the ground here, we're flying along, and I get into the turn. I start the turn here, wingtip still flying. Here we have a stall generating here on the elevon. I'm in the turn, and the wing is stalling. But the wingtip, these tufts, even though they're pointed way out towards the tip, they're still attached. The flow is still attached out here. And that's why I'm able to maintain control of the aircraft. That's why it's not dropping a wing. I am in a turn, wing is stalled. It should drop a wing and break into a spin, but it doesn't, because both wingtips are doing this right now. Both wingtips are still flying. And I think that's the huge benefit of having this gigantic potential fence called the winglet inboard on the wing as opposed to out at the tip, that you can control the flow over this section of the wing and not putting a control surface out here. You keep the wingtips flying. So I have 6 feet of wing at the ends of each side that always fly. They're always up and flying. Despite all of the screwed up flow conditions that are occurring elsewhere, those tips are still flying, and they're keeping the wing from dropping and breaking into a spin. So appears to be working, plus, so I'm very happy with that. And I think it portends for an aircraft that's safe to fly in thermals. That you'll be able to fly it really slow, bank it over, and not have to worry about slipping into a spin. And there's the crash. Boom, and we're down. Okay, so we're going to do one more segment before I say goodbye here. We're going to reposition and get the whiteboard up, and we're going to have a little chalk talk.
So now that we've shown the flights and walked through the analysis of them, I think I can sit here and safely summarize the achievements of the design. Now that I've proven that it can fly, I think we can say the following things about it. This is the highest performance foot launch glider ever built. I do have a question about the new Swift 3. They're claiming some very high numbers there, and they could very well be achieving them. They have a laminar flow airfoil, and of course I have yet to prove out my numbers, but it's close. You know, I might have a little bit more performance than they do, and we'll see how it works out in the long run. Of those 2 gliders, that's it. Nobody else has got higher performance. This is the lightest standard class sailplane ever built. Standard class sailplane is 15-meter span, and I come in at 110 pounds, and by far that is the lightest 15-meter span glider ever built. This is the first foot-launchable standard class sailplane. There have been several other attempts, but none of them have achieved actual foot launching without towing. There's been a couple 15-meter designs that were foot launchable, in quotes, but they had to be towed into the air. And I've shown that you can literally run down a hill with this thing and take off in a standard class sailplane. So pretty cool. It is car toppable. I don't know of any other standard class sailplane that you can put in a box and put it on top of your car. Now, I don't use that as my recommended mode of transportation, but I've shown that it can be done. If that's your limit, you don't want to pull a trailer, you don't have to. You put it on top of your station wagon or your truck or whatever. I prefer to take it along as a trailer. This is the largest hang glider in span ever built. I don't know of any other hang glider that's 15 meters. If it's out there, I just haven't heard of it. As far as we know at this point, this is a spin-proof design. We see a lot of aerodynamic indications showing that you can stall the wing in a turn and it won't drop the wing. And it's a big deal. That's a big plus. It should be very safe in thermals. And of course, spin-proof is within limits. If you take the CG outside of the CG limits, well, then it's probably not going to be spin-proof anymore because that's a big no-no. So within the CG limits, spin-proof. As far as I know, in terms of foot-launch aircraft, this is going to have the highest VNE. The maximum speed that you can cruise at with this thing will be up around 85 miles an hour, much like a standard class sailplane. Not quite that fast. You're not going to go over 100, but you could probably hunk along at a good 80, 85 miles an hour in turbulence and be fine. Wings are going to be flexible. They're going to flex up and down, but they are built to take those types of loads. And in fact, this aircraft is designed to plus or minus 6 Gs with a 1.5 safety factor on it. So that's good. So now that it's flown, we've proven these things to be true. And in my mind, these are significant achievements within the ultralight sailplane or Class 2 hang glider category. And it's been a long road. It literally has taken me a whole 10 years from when I first started thinking about it to actually flying it. And about 3.5, 4 years of building and testing and so forth to get up to that first flight. Of course, if you want to look way back, if you want to go back to my first wing, I did my first wing in the mid-'80s. So it's been a long journey from there to here, but it sure has been interesting and fun along the way. It's been a generous amount of frustration too, but it has all paid off in the long run in my mind. I think I'm now able to present to the public a design that is extremely high performance. It's right at the upper limit of what I think can be achieved with foot-launch aircraft, and you could actually build it yourself in your own shop or garage at home with common hand tools. This entire glider I built with average tools that I have in my shop, and if I can do it, then somebody else can do it too. And to that end, I have a special offer that I'm going to make here, and let me get you flipped around and I'll tell you what I got coming for you. We're here to talk about how the center of gravity got messed up. Entirely my fault. Lack of imagination and thinking about the reality of the geometry. So here's the basic configuration. The wings overhead, pilot's cage is down here. The pilot's cage is currently set up to be parallel with the chord line of the airfoil. So when the pilot's cage is sitting on level ground, the root angle of attack is 0 degrees. Okay, it's important to remember that. The height here between the bottom of the wing and the pilot's cage is about 34 inches, give or take a little. The center of gravity, and this is the empty center of gravity here, without me strapped in, is slightly back on the tail boom. The exact distance isn't really important for this discussion. This is not ONP, this is an open circle, that's the neutral point. So the neutral point is behind the current empty center of gravity. Now, for these flights that you saw, my lift harness, the flight harness is attached here, just forward of the rear strut of the pilot's cage. And the lift harness that I used to pick the glider up with I'm hooked in right behind that fitting for the rear strut. Nominally, I designed the glider to be hooked in up here from a bracket that's underneath the wing. And I'm free to swing. In this particular case, I'm hooked in down here. I have enough slack to run, but not a lot of slack for shifting my weight fore and aft. And you'll see from the sketch that when the pilot's cage is level and the chord line of the wing is level, I positioned my hook in directly below the empty center of gravity. And I wanted to fly these flights with my weight placed at the empty center of gravity, because we know from the ground runs where I wasn't hooked in that the wing flies nice when there's nobody on board, and at the center of gravity is the empty center of gravity. It flies really nice, easy to fly, very consistent. It's great. So that's where I decided to put my body weight. So I put it right there. And I'm lifting back here, I'm lifting behind the center of gravity, because remember, we want to lift the tail first and then the nose, because when we were lifting the nose first, the glider was going to too high an angle of attack, falling backwards, all because of the weight and balance thing, because we're hooked in here, center of gravity is up around in here somewhere, and it causes you to tilt backwards. So I'm lifting the tail first and then flying the nose up. We discovered that works quite good. So, all's well and good at that point. So what happened? Why is that center of gravity wrong? Well, Rawl wasn't thinking. Didn't think it all the way through. The root angle of attack at stall for this wing is somewhere around 5 to 7 degrees, maybe 8 degrees, a little higher. Could probably go as high as 10 degrees. Flight angle of attack, the root is going to be somewhere around 4 to 5 degrees. Well, let me tilt this whole board to exaggerate the situation for you. So in flight, the nose is up like this, and the pilot's cage goes with it. It's a rigid structure. So I'm going to exaggerate this way up like this. Let me probably drop this down a little bit here like this. Hope you can still see that. Yeah, that's nice and exaggerated. So now, well, this center of gravity stays in the same position, right? It's just the configuration of the wing. And I'm hooked in here. But there's 34 inches here, and it's deflected by whatever that angle of attack is. So where I'm hooked in, my CG is now forward of the empty CG. My weight is now hooked in at some position that is forward of the center of gravity. So I actually hooked in too far forward. I should have been hooked in. I should have included this angle and set my hook in point somewhere down here in the middle of this range, so that in flight I would be the pendulum, the perpendicular, directly underneath that center of gravity. So I forgot to include the fact that the wing isn't level at the root in standard flight. And the angle of attack that it flies at actually repositioned me forward of the center of gravity. And that's why we see when I push way back, when I'm going like this, like, whoa, stop, 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 I'm pushing my center of gravity back in this range here somewhere because my butt's up against the cross member back here. My belly button's now back in here somewhere, which in flight is now directly below that center of gravity. And then the wing flies really nice. And then I get up flying and I'm seated and I'm back up here. Wings like this. I'm here. I'm forward. We're up like this. I'm here. I'm forward of that center of gravity. And now it's nose heavy. A bit of a problem. You say, oh, come on, Ralph, 5, 7 degrees. How much difference could that make? And that's what I thought at first. But when you punch the numbers, do that sine of 7 degrees, 34 inches, it's actually a 4-inch difference. I was sitting 4 inches too far forward. And if we watch the videos, that's about how much space there is between my back and the cross member that's on the pilot's cage. There's about 5 inches there. And when I push myself way back, yeah, my feet are forward, but most of my mass, my big fat belly, is aft. I've pushed my center of gravity back about 4 inches, which is about how much this is off by. So it's just a simple geometry problem and a stupid mistake. But stupid mistakes happen. And the flights would have gone much better if I had either been hooked in back here or hooked in up overhead to the actual system that I designed for suspending the pilot. Because if I hook in at the center of gravity up here, I'm hooking in at the center of gravity both horizontally and vertically. And no matter what this pitch angle is, I will always dangle directly underneath that center of gravity. And then we don't have those issues. And I'm also free to move to adjust my center of gravity much more with greater ease and better control the glider. So, got to remember to bring the right straps next time and hook in overhead. Yeah, we have the question about crashing and pilot cage failing and me getting dragged along because I'm hooked in up here. But in general, we're not going to be crashing. This is not the idea. So we're going to go back to the regular hook-in method. Hook in up overhead where I understand the whole geometry and bring the right straps with next time. So that is... that's the story there. And that's how the center of gravity got messed up. And we'll get that fixed for next time. So, I got about a month's worth of work ahead of me, give or take, to do the repairs and upgrades. There's other things that I'm changing to upgrade the design a little bit. And in that time frame, we'll be coming into fall here. And our wind conditions at the coast will be changing, and we'll get more southerly winds. We get southwest winds when we're prefrontal and postfrontal, and that will allow me to fly down the beach as opposed to towards the ocean, which would be much, much better. So we're probably quite a ways away from you seeing any more flight video I have a couple other videos that I'll be doing in between to transfer some additional lessons learned from me to you. And in the meantime, I ask you to hang in there, no pun intended, and I got more good things to come. And speaking of good things to come, I'll put up a picture here somewhere. I've finally knuckled under and started creating the 3D models of the aircraft and all of its components. And I have an example here showing the control stick and mixer that I've completed in SolidWorks. And what I'm looking at right now is a lot of people have asked about plans, and I says, no, I don't think there's going to be any, maybe, I don't know. At this point, I thought, well, I'm drawing this stuff up for my own use, but yeah, maybe other people might be interested, maybe they have some use for it, maybe it's of some value to them. So what I've decided to do is something quite unusual. I'm going to give you incrementally a free set of plans if you're a Patreon member. If you go into Patreon, you'll find that there's a category where you can sign up to help support the test flying. The test flying is quite expensive. I'm a little surprised by that. But we have fuel. It's really high right now. Quite often there's lodging if we go to a remote location. And I like to help out Peter with his travel costs and so forth. So there's some expense involved there. And I would really appreciate any help with the costs associated with testing this. So if you help support further testing, I'll give you a free set of plans eventually. Now, it might take me a year or more to finish all of the models for the entire aircraft. And it could occur that we discover that the aircraft is not safe after all, and in which case I would stop. I would stop distribution of those 3D models. In the meantime, you'll get something every month. And I remind you that the 3D models and the plans are free. I am not charging for those. You are making a contribution to help support the testing. So I reserve the right to stop delivery of those 3D models if I deem it necessary for safety or other reasons. So I can't promise you here that you will get an entire set, but you will get something every month. It's a subscription model. And if we get all the way to the end together with this thing, if you stick with me and keep making that donation every month, and you get your packages every month, and I keep going long enough, eventually we'll have an entire set of 3D models for the entire aircraft. And these are detailed enough and have all the BOM information, they have everything with them where you could actually go out and build your own wing. And with all the videos that are up on YouTube, I show all of the construction process. So between the YouTube videos and those 3D models, I don't see why a good builder couldn't go out and build their own wing. So there's your chance to get your set of plans. You help support the test flying, and I'll start delivering you 3D models in the very near future here. So go over to Patreon. I got the link in the description. Take a look at that. And if you're motivated, sign up. And I really appreciate your additional support.